own. But let's go ahead and get started with tonight's topics. So joining us is Sarah Poindexter and Brett Feldman, and they are teaming up on projects together from two different areas of this topic we're talking tonight. The first is Sarah from Studio Sistena, which is a landscape architecture and design business. And also we have Brett Feldman, who is an attorney with Claire Harrison Harvey Brandsburg. And they're going to tell us a little bit more about themselves in a minute, but the topic is landscape architecture, design, and zoning. And we recently added zoning onto the end of there because we realized that's a very big topic of concern, when you're looking to do a lot of landscape projects. And these two on our call and know a lot about that, and figured that would be really beneficial for you new developers who might not have encountered a lot of the stuff they have. So I'm so happy they're joining us tonight. I'll hand it over to first Sarah. Sarah, why don't you just introduce yourself, and then Brett, when she's done, let us know who you are and why you're joining us tonight.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, and as Derek mentioned, I'm having a little bit of audio trouble, so please interrupt me if it's not coming in clearly. But hello, everyone. We're sounding better. Okay,
yep,
good.
We're good.
Okay, great. So Sarah Poindexter. I'm actually a civil engineer with Studio Sistena. We provide an integrated site design approach, which we include civil engineering and landscape architecture. And we apply both skills to land development projects within Philadelphia, ranging from single-family homes, commercial projects, up to institutional healthcare and universities. So excited to be here tonight.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And Brett, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good evening. And first, just Derek, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of this program. I've been following this program and for a number of years, and I'm real honored to be part of this. And Sarah, thanks for asking me to team up with you tonight. So again, Brett Feldman. I'm a land use and zoning attorney here in Philadelphia. I live in the city. I live over in West Philly, University City. 2 kids, 2 dogs, and I'm a partner at the law firm of Claire Harrison. I guess I've been doing this now for 20 plus years, and really have had the opportunity to work on small projects to some of the largest projects in the city and kind of everything in between. And it's exciting to to have a chance to address maybe folks who are starting out because as I think I told Sarah and Derek when we had one of our prep sessions, one of my largest clients started off doing a single family home, and he called me up and he said, "Hey, I need your help to go to the zoning board because I need a 9-foot rear yard and I only have 7.5. Can you help me?" So really, whenever you're starting, wherever you're starting from, there's a great opportunity out there. What I do is I help developers, I help businesses, I help homeowners get all the approvals that they need to get a zoning permit or a building permit, and have a chance to go in front of the zoning board, the historical commission, the art commission, city planning, and work with a number of professionals, architects, and civil engineers like Sarah on a whole range of projects here in Philadelphia. So I'll stop right there.
All right, thank you so much. It's great to have both of you tonight, and let's spare no time and get into the topic tonight. And first, I think our topic aligns heavily with Studio Sistena's mission, as a landscape architecture, business. Why don't you tell us what is your mission? What does it mean? And then also a little bit about Studio Sistena's past projects, some that people might be very, very familiar with around the city.
Sure. Our firm actually started out with green roof design. Our founder actually brought the technology from Germany to the United States, and so 25 years ago. And since then, the company has expanded its services to not only include on-structure landscape, but also on-ground landscape. And now we've expanded our civil engineering services as well to not just include design, but permitting. We like to differentiate ourselves by being a design-led firm. So often, you'll see civil engineering firms that provide landscape architecture. We think of ourselves as landscape architecture that provides civil engineering. It's really about the urban design of the project, the biophilic benefits that we're able to provide, and how we can make the city better through good design. So that's really our mission.
Great. And then, I was telling Brett right before we started that my biggest, I guess, trademark studio sustainer project that I recognized was the Sierra Green by Drexel, where I went to college, and then also the 3.0 University Place, where I lived on the block right around the corner, and was woken up by the construction site many mornings for 2 years. But it's really cool to see that on your website and see that beautiful green roof you did there. Can you tell us a little bit about like the history of projects you've done and your experience kind of working in this integrated civil engineering plus landscape architecture world?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the most exciting things about Sierra Green, the project that you mentioned, is that we were able to layer lots of benefits and requirements within one space. So while it looks like, just from somebody visiting, it's a beautiful open space area for the community to get together. It's actually a very complex stormwater management system. It's, a green roof layered on what we call kind of a pancake cistern, which is a blue roof essentially holding water underneath that green space. And then, there's actually, mature trees on the roof. And if you can imagine like the wind forces that happen above there, it takes a lot to really understand how to make sure that a tree is settled correctly, that it won't blow over. So a lot of engineering goes into that, where it might look like a landscape architecture project. There's a lot of design and technical support that goes into putting a project like that together. You mentioned 3.0. We're also currently working on a few different commercial projects. One's by the Frankfurt Transportation Center, where it's a grocery store and a healthcare with affordable housing above and a parking lot, maybe more of a traditional type commercial project. And it's been especially interesting to apply these requirements that we're going to talk about tonight to this project, because it's such a large parcel, and how to really benefit from the amount of trees, the amount of landscaping required for a parcel this size, and to do it in a strategic way that it can be used as kind of a community open space. So, that's the approach that we take to projects is how can we creatively combine different requirements, whether it be stormwater or landscape requirements. There's even a density bonus that's offered by the city for green roofs. So how can we kind of layer all these requirements and create something really special?
Awesome. Great. Thank you. And speaking of the logistics side of things, right? Like, how are we going to do this, with all the parties that we have to get to agree to do it? Let's shift over to Brett. And Brett, why don't you tell us about your firm and what you do on a day-to-day basis, and sort of what legal work are you typically doing, outside of projects with Studio Sustaina?
Yeah, sure. So I work for a 100-person law firm, and we do, a law firm does litigation. They do it's a full service law firm, but we have a large real estate department that handle financing, that handle transactions, and then within that real estate department, there's a kind of a group of us who actually handle mostly a lot of Philadelphia-based land use and zoning, which is, again, what does that mean? It's someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I want to build, I want to build a building. I want to build a restaurant. I want to convert my, an old office building or an old factory building to apartments. What are all the different city approvals that I might need in order to get a zoning permit? And then with that zoning permit, then you get a building permit. You do the construction, you get a certificate of occupancy, and you move to occupancy. So, within that land use and zoning bucket, it's working with license and inspections. If a property is historic, we have to, obtain the approvals from the Historic Commission. I would just tell anyone who's out there working in the city, make sure that the property, that you're working on, find out whether it's historic. There's been a lot of new additions to the register, so that's something to take a look at. There's a lot of approvals that need to come from the Art Commission for signage. There's a lot of approvals that need to come from the City Planning Commission if you're changing lots, moving lot lines, facade reviews, landscaping, as we'll talk about. City Planning has become the lead agency on landscaping. And over the number of years, I've had a chance to work on, again, a range of projects where, we've had to obtain some of those approvals or all those approvals. Some of them you might know, I did a lot of the work with, this is going back some time now, for Toll Brothers over, Naval Square, which was, and that was a huge project kind of for that whole part of the city, that showed a lot of confidence in that part of the city. And then I think led to a tremendous amount of development over there. Worked on that, a number of shopping centers, and probably maybe the one that maybe some of the folks on the call tonight know. There's a new Subaru deal, a huge, massive Subaru dealership in Philadelphia, right off of 76 as you come into the city. A Subaru dealership that I had the opportunity to work on that. So if you come into 76, right on that University Avenue exit, there's a 7-story, 6-story Subaru dealership that looks like something out of Manhattan. That was one of those.
I live like not even less than 10 blocks away from there, so I'm very familiar. Pass it on my
It is. I worked. People say, like, what was one of the coolest projects you ever worked on? It was that one, because it was just so different than anything I had worked on, and we had to go through all these different city agencies. We worked with all the community groups. We worked with all the elected officials, which I neglected to say, but that's part of this. And then again, with the civil engineers, the architects, engineers, landscape, to go from A all the way to Z, to getting that zoning permit, getting that building permit, and moving on with the project. So it's really cool at the end to be able to drive past something and say, hey, I had a chance to work on that. And I think most of the stuff that Sarah and I work on, we're really proud of the type of work that we've done.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about the type of work that you do with Sarah, and if there's any specific projects you worked on together you want to highlight, or just what's your relationship? How do you guys kind of get things done together?
Yeah, I don't know if I can specifically talk about the specific project.
No worries.
I can give you I should have asked the client. It probably would have no problem with it. But
understood.
It's near the river. It is a historical a complex of old historical buildings that were used for storage and cold storage, and probably a very exciting project. He's redeveloping building after building. Instead of needing to demolish those buildings, is coming up with adaptive reuses for storage, for residential, for mixed use, and one of these projects within this kind of assemblage of buildings, properties. Sarah and I are working together on a construction of a new building. And with that, all the engineering issues, the site issues, and the landscaping issues. So that, I think, what kind of brought us together on that project was that project. And it's now that there's new landscaping requirements that we'll talk about, that kind of made us look at that project and work with the different city agencies to move forward.
Okay, great. And another question for you,
and
Brett. Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to add, I think the role of, zoning attorney, civil engineer, landscape architect is strategy. We kind of behind the scenes, we're like, okay, which codes apply? How do we interpret them? How do we want to strategize to get this through? And that's really the behind, and when you find somebody that you really work well together, it's stick with them, because, that's going to be the best way to kind of get through a project quickly and to navigate a pretty difficult process in the city.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of shift focus to zoning specifically now. And this is, I saw a couple of our current jump starters in the fall 2023 class on the call, and they would be very interested to have this discussion, because they spent about 20 minutes derailing the conversation for zoning questions during our class the other day. So I'm happy we're here, and we can really dig into a specific type of these zoning questions. But first, let's Brett, if you could describe sort of the historical context of I know that's a huge ask, historical context of zoning in Philadelphia, but specifically in the case of landscaping, right? Why do certain neighborhoods look certain ways and have more green space and less green space. So what's the timeline like here with getting us to where we are in the city with like the frustrating world of zoning approval that we work with?
Yeah, probably 12 questions in there, so I'm not sure exactly where to start. But here's what I would say is, so for a long time, I don't think there was a tremendous amount of focus on landscaping, on stormwater management, on trees, maintaining trees, planting the trees, and a lot of that was, a lot of the work that was being done in the city was, you're taking an old building and you're converting it, or it's a lot that there aren't a lot of trees on, so and a lot of it also was, we were, I think, so hungry for development that, a lot of these issues, we were just happy something was happening, to move development ahead. And, I mean, again, Sarah could, certainly on the stormwater management, but obviously over the last 10, 15 years, there's been a much bigger focus on stormwater management, on, we've got this combined system where, we saw what happened in New York City, was it last Friday? We've got, I guess, a pretty similar system, all the water basically, it all kind of goes into, one system. And when it's overwhelmed, it goes into the Delaware, goes into the Schuylkill, and that's just something we can't, we can't have long term. So there's been a much bigger focus on landscaping. I would say in the last couple of years, there's always been a focus on street trees. There's always been a focus on, in new shopping centers, you have to have a certain amount of landscaping, in the parking lot. So it's always been in the code, but in the last couple of years, there's been some of these new mega projects. Some of them, some of the big industrial projects that have happened in the city, where 10 acres, 8 acres, and there was a lot of trees. And it's really kind of taken a big focus now on, how do we want development, but how do we do it in a way that's responsible? If we're taking trees down, how do we make sure we're either going to replant them on site, we're going to replant them, an adjacent property, or we're going to, pay into a fee in lieu, a fund to plant trees somewhere else. And that's what kind of gave rise to this new, tree landscaping requirements, that really is just in the last year. And, that in development world, we're all kind of, still trying to understand. It's simple if you're starting with it's a little bit simple if you're starting with a new property, you're starting from scratch. But so much of what we do in Philadelphia is it's taking an existing site, retrofitting it, a shopping center, renovating it. Sarah and I, this project that we're working on, all these new buildings, putting a new building in. So it gets more complicated, actually, how do you apply it? But that's kind of, I think the timeline over the last 10 or 15 years to get us to where we are, in the city, and, a greater environmental consciousness.
Awesome. That's great. And Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess just that I did read earlier that the program is, I guess, over the next 30 years to get 30% of Philadelphia covered by tree canopy. And I think it's like 20% now, but there's been a huge decrease in the last 10, 15 years, and especially in neighborhoods that have had a lot of demolition or turnover. Trees aren't being replanted, and so you'll see neighborhoods without trees. And I guess during their studies, they measured that there was up to 22 degrees difference in temperature in the neighborhoods that didn't have trees. So there's like an equity issue with this too, that I think is trying to be resolved through these new rules.
Yeah, great. So what's Brett, back to you. What city departments and agencies are sort of the ones behind this discussion and making, these decisions on the city side of things? Is it just the zoning commission? Is it other departments outside of that?
No, most of what's happening now is again, so there's these new tree requirements, new landscaping requirements that add on to what was there before. The city planning commission, I would say 85–90% of those requirements, they're the ones now doing the main review for again, if you're taking trees down, working with arborists and engineers and developers on do the trees need to be replaced? Where, if so, where? So it's a lot of the city planning commission. L&I has some more limited role on, if you just kind of come in and you're not building anything, you're just clearing large areas of trees. It's a little more of an L&I role. Also Parks and Rec. There's a fund. If you have a hardship, if you're not able to replant those trees or some of that landscaping, there's a fund now where you would pay into and you say, hey, I can't, a fee in lieu, I can't replace the trees on site or adjacent. I'm going to pay, X amount of dollars for those trees. And there's a fund that is, getting off the ground now that is, I believe, run out of Parks and Rec, which, as Sarah talked about, is trying to look at other neighborhoods and say, hey, how do we increase that tree canopy? We know where I live, there's a lot of trees. In other neighborhoods, there's plenty of trees, but there's a lot of neighborhoods that have almost no trees. And how do we try to encourage tree planting in those neighborhoods? And that's where this innovative fee in lieu is being geared and directed to.
Great. Thank you. So thanks for the background. And I think it's always helpful for people to kind of know the reasons why these regulations and provisions are in place. Sometimes that makes it a little easier to deal with the struggle of going through them. But Sarah, why don't we bring it a little bit closer back to the scale of development that Jumpstarters are working at, and sort of thinking about for a first time, or maybe up to, within someone's first 10 small residential rehab projects, what thresholds and triggers of improvement, right, should they be concerned that there's going to be special zoning approval required? So for these small and mid-level developers, what do you think they should be aware of in terms of what's going to trigger or exceed the threshold of special approval?
Yeah, so the good news is that for lots that are less than 5,000 square feet, and for single family and two family homes, the majority of these requirements don't apply. Doesn't mean you shouldn't plant a tree, but it does mean that, the zoning code will not require one. And so, this really does apply to once you get over that 5,000 square foot threshold.
Okay. So for the sake of our discussion, let's assume somebody's working on a project that, has a lot bigger than 5,000 square feet and is considering, removing or adding trees.
Sure. So, without getting into too many of the specific details, there's two sections of the code that really apply to these types of projects. That's 14.705, which is landscape and trees, and then 14.803, which applies to parking lots. And so for the on-site landscape, there's different requirements for buffers, for heritage tree preservation, for existing tree replacement, and then for actually new trees, which is 1 per 1,600 square foot of development, which is often the most difficult one to meet, because for 5,000 square feet, that's 4 trees if you're rounding up. And so a lot of times the development just doesn't have the space, but that's where you have to get creative. And there's also street tree requirements. So again, for single family home, there's not a street tree requirement, but once you have 3 subdivided lots in a row, that's when street trees are then required. And there's a certain spacing requirement that's mentioned in the code. Parking lots are similar for the 5,000 square foot trigger. However, if they're smaller than 5,000 square feet, there's still tree requirements once you have 5 spots. So there's all these nuances. You might think that, you're off the hook, but then there's one little sentence in there that, you might not have read. Right. And that's where the experience from me or Brett can be helpful in kind of planning for those things. Is that helpful, or does that answer your question?
Yes, that
Okay.
definitely does. And I think those are things that are, definitely something that people need to start thinking about now, so that when they encounter it later on, they can make an like informed and supported decision, like you said, from somebody who is an expert on the topic, rather than just doing something and, suffering the consequences, or, like detrimenting the project because of it. So yeah, thank you. What about filling in an empty lot with new construction? Is there any does that
So
automatically,
that's
even if it's smaller than 5,000 feet, or even if
So if it's smaller than 5,000 square feet, it does not trigger the code. So if it's an empty lot, now there are still heritage tree requirements. So if there is a heritage tree, and that's really required. So if you have, I think, Brett, you were the one who said this the other day, if there's a tree that's maybe over 24 inches in diameter,
that's, I guess, what,
then, there's a pretty good chance it's a heritage tree, but you have to get an arborist to basically to certify the tree and to figure out its health. So that's
and these sorts of like things and decisions, like you can't just Google what a heritage tree looks like, right? And then make it the decision yourself. It's you need an expert, right? Somebody that's kind of like educated and knowledgeable about it, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
I think the busiest people in the city right now in this development process are arborists.
Gotcha.
It is unbelievable. Suddenly, they're just scratching their head right now, saying, "Geez, like now I'm like the most in," because they're the ones now increasingly who are making these determinations. You got 20 trees on a site, and there's those trees. Some of them, we have a lot of trees that I call them weed trees. I mean, it's probably not a great term because and Sarah's gonna, yell at me later on. But there's these trees that, they started off as
invasive tree species.
Yeah, I guess that's what they are. Sorry, yeah. I'm not a, I got to go back to school a little bit more, but I call them weed trees. And they've been there, and now 20 years later, they're like huge. And the question is my project now going to be, impacted because of this? So you have to have, these trained arborists who come out and they say, hey, it's dying, it's diseased, it's invasive. It maybe, it poses a threat to, it's hanging over a sidewalk. And if those trees fall into those type of categories, then, you don't really have to replace them. It's a much different process. So anyone who's looking to be an arborist, all of a sudden come to Philadelphia right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Brett. And Sarah, you might have mentioned this, but how about for commercial development? Say like, is residential 5,000 square foot plus development different than commercial? Is there any different requirements there?
So it's most projects that are 5,000 square feet and higher are commercial. So really all types of developments that are over 5,000 square feet, except for agricultural or projects that are like a part of an environmental remediation project. So two uses that you don't see very often, but any other use besides those two. And there are some nuances for like industrial projects and so forth. There's some different calculations, but they still apply.
Got it. Awesome. So another question for you, like, when you come across a project or you're looking at something and you're like, like, how are we going to get this done? What is your signal to engage a zoning attorney like Brett? Are you involving them like from when it's just an idea in your head, or are you kind of waiting until you've gone through some due diligence, and like at what stage in that process do you involve the zoning attorney? Because I'm sure it's costly, and that might be something to consider for new developers. Like, how do I know that the cost benefit of doing this and engaging somebody like Brett is going to be valued in the end product?
There's a lot of projects where they fit nicely into the zoning code, or you can design something to meet the zoning requirements, and those typically don't need a zoning attorney. Once the project starts to kind of get into the gray areas of the zoning code, that's usually when I tell the developer, it'd probably be good to get an attorney on to help interpret and to navigate this in the best way. Because if you aren't able to meet, I think Brett's going to go into this a little bit more. There are opportunities for waivers, which he has a lot of experience with. But then there's also, when you can't meet the code, you can get pushed into the variance process, which is a long process. You meet with the community, you meet with the zoning board of adjustment, and that, there's sometimes ways to get around that with good design and with strategizing. Even there's sometimes when it's appropriate to maybe change the zoning of the parcel, which takes the support of the council person in your district and an ordinance change. And that's also something that a zoning attorney is well versed at, like coordinating and getting the right people in the room and making sure that the language is written correctly to make it push through. So as projects become more complex, some of the smaller ones have the same issues, but there is a certain point when once the project doesn't fit neatly into the code, it's usually time to bring on a zoning attorney, at least for some insight.
And I think that applies for all zoning, right? Like even if it's use zoning or interior alterations or anything like that. Yeah, same applies. Great. So then my next question is, how about a landscape architect? When do you engage them in the project? If you were a developer, take off your landscape architecture hat and say you're looking at a project and have this great idea for a green roof or some landscape design. When do you think people should engage you or someone like you for their project?
Sure. I can speak from a perspective of a civil engineer who wasn't always in a firm with landscape architects. And the interesting thing about being a civil engineer is that we're brought in early on the project because of these zoning requirements. So often we're, thinking through access to the site with, trucks or trash pickup and, how is the site going to operate from an engineering perspective? And then unfortunately, landscape architects tend to come in later in the design once the site's already set. And that can be a real detriment to the project because there's a ton of good ideas that if they were implemented early on and when the site's being laid out, it could just be a better project from a pedestrian, accessibility standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint, from, a biodiversity standpoint. It might be good things for the stormwater management. So, in my opinion, I think that the benefit of having both the landscape architect and the civil at the beginning of a project can really change, the success of the design.
Great. So my next question, it's back to you, Brett. Are there exceptions to these regulations and the sort of zoning rules and stuff that applies to these projects? Is there differences and exceptions for affordable housing? I know a lot of jump starters are looking to develop with, PHA housing choice vouchers or, using other city mechanisms to provide affordable housing. What exceptions exist in your knowledge?
Yeah, so if you look at 14705, which Sarah referenced, that's where that 5,000 foot threshold is, and some of the other environmental projects and things like that. But there are also some provisions in there that exempt you out from the landscaping if 51% or more of the units in a residential project will meet the definition of affordable housing under the Philadelphia Code, which you can quibble with whether that's affordable or not, but that's I'm not getting into that one tonight. So I guess what I would say is if you are working on a project that more than 50% of those units are deemed to be affordable, you're probably exempted out. Again, I'm not trying to provide legal guidance there, but sometimes just knowing that there's stuff in there is enough to think about it, and then get further clarification. So that is an important potential exemption.
That's great. And how about like specific areas of the city? Are there any sort of geographic boundaries of where there are certain regulations and certain restrictions or anything like that?
Yeah, I believe, I should have checked this specifically. I'll try to check as we're talking here. I think one of the councilmatic districts was exempted out from the provisions. I'll have to take a look at that, but most, if not all, the city now I want to go take a look. Is exempt is covered here, and I think that the reality is, these type of environmental, tree and landscaping, are universally shared throughout most of the city. These concerns.
Yeah.
Again, that's something that you'd want to look at with your your engineer, your architect, and your land use and zoning attorney.
Great. And then, so what options does a developer have if the project can't meet these requirements? Are there like, a senses of appeal or any like process that's set in place for that?
So there was an informal process before. It's now become more formal. There's a waiver process.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, for example, you're supposed to plant 10 trees, and there's just no room on the site, for whatever reason, topography, or project that Sarah and I are working on. There's no sunlight that gets to where there's open space. Like, just think about it. The tree would die. So there's a process where, or you're in a parking lot and it's an existing shopping center, and you're changing the drive-through lane, and you're supposed to have a certain amount of landscape buffer between the drive-through lane and your lot line, and you're not going to be able to do it because the drive-through lane's already there, and you're just modifying it, but now you're back into so there's it's kind of a hardship situation. There's just almost no way to comply with the landscaping, the landscape buffers, the number of trees. So they've opened up this process where you need to meet with city planning, and you prepare a written paragraph 2, 3, whatever it is, explanation of, hey, I can't comply with the landscape buffer requirements because X, Y, and Z. What I'm going to do instead is, like, on that drive-through lane, I can't do the buffer, the 5-foot or the 10-foot or whatever it is, but I'm going to put some more landscaping over on another part of the shopping center. Mm-hmm. And the planning commission has the power now to issue a waiver, exempting you out of the requirement, or saying, hey, you're moving that landscape, to a different part of the shopping center, a different part of your housing development. So this waiver process is available, and then they'll stamp your plans. If it's a situation where you're supposed to plant those 10 trees, and let's say those, the trees, you're supposed to plant the trees, and you can't plant the trees, then that's where you get put into you're away from that requirement, but then you've got to pay, I think, what is it, $1,000 a tree or something like that. You've got to pay into this tree replenishment fund. And then that's the money that is, earmarked to go to other parts of the city that don't have trees. So city planning is really the ones driving this. They're working real hard to, come up with a way to make this all work, so we can have good design, we can have developments, and, we can move forward.
Great. So, and if for that waiver process, do you need to have a zoning attorney to go through that? Is that something that an individual could do?
No, I don't think so.
Would it help?
It helps, but yeah, but hey, the reality is these are things that also can be done by the civil. They could be done by the landscape architect.
Gotcha.
It could be done by the architect. But you got to know all this, right? And that's that's right. my job. I don't draw. I'm not the architect. I don't know where the utility lines are. But as a zoning attorney, my job is to kind of work with all these amazing professionals, and keep us moving forward.
That's great. Cool. All right. Well, I have one more question here, and then we'll open it up to any live Q&A from the audience that we have. And thanks for everybody for joining us tonight. I see we have almost 30 people. That's great. The last question I have is for Sarah, and it's sort of a bit of a higher level question, bringing it back to the jump starters we have on the call here. What advice or tips do you have for aspiring developers who are seeking to complete like developments with these innovative, involved, complex landscape architecture projects? Do you think that it's something that you need to slowly build up to? Is it something you jump right into? How did you kind of get to where you are, and what advice would you have for people who are just kind of starting out with real estate development at the lowest level?
So as a developer, from the developer's point of view, is that, I mean, you know, of course, I've never been a developer. So, I mean, my advice is just from what I would think. But, you know, I think if I were starting out as a developer, I'd want to see how my project fits in the larger neighborhood. Mm-hmm. You know, not only does the architecture of the building fit and work with the neighborhood, but how am I bringing a benefit to my neighbors and to the surrounding space? And I think it's, you know, if everyone in our community could try to leave a space better than we found it, I think that's kind of the point of zoning codes like this. It's like, okay, we've lost something. How can we all come together and build it back? Yeah. And I think we've seen a huge, you know, influx of people moving to the city. We've seen, you know, even through the pandemic, we saw lots of commercial spaces opening. The city has like a really great vibe and energy. So it's like, how can we all contribute to that vision and keep beautifying the city?
Yeah, that's great. And can I ask you, like, where would you suggest people learn more about that? Like, if they aren't really sure sort of what the like ideal image of the city looks like to the community, where would you suggest people look, or where should they start learning about it?
I mean, so learning about the neighborhoods, honestly, there's so many neighborhood, you know, groups that build up our RCOs, and, you know, and sometimes they can be, you know, hard to work with when we have variances and so forth, but they're also a great source of information to just know, okay, what's the history of this neighborhood? What used to be here? What is important? What can we bring back? What can we, you know, emphasize? I think, to me, that would make the development process fun. I mean, it's about making a profit, but it's also about doing something you feel good about. So, and I think, you know, the aesthetics can really help, and also the biodiversity. So
awesome. Great. Yeah, biodiversity. I wish we should have another JUMPinar just on biodiversity, like not even real estate related, right?
Derek, can I just jump in real quick?
Yeah.
City planning had, I think I know as of like last year it still existed, the Citizens Planning Institute through planning, which was, I don't know, does that still exist? But it was they offered all these courses. I think you applied, and they took a group of like 30 or 40 folks throughout different parts of the city, and they kind of it was, you know, maybe similar to the program that, you know, you're running. I mean, a little bit different, but they went through the whole zoning process. Yeah, thank you. I think that, and that's probably one of the best ways. I had a chance to speak in front of them a couple of times, so it was amazing, you know, to be able to, you know, I think they had 10 or 12 classes on zoning, on historic preservation, you know, stormwater management, all these. So I would just have everyone take a look at that. Great opportunity, great materials.
Great point, Brett. Yeah, we even had some like starting out engineers who became involved in that just to get an education on the zoning code. And so it's really just design professionals, just interested, you know, community members. It really is a great resource for everyone.
Awesome, great. And I'll be sure to send that out as a link in our follow-up email. And I
think it still exists. I'm just making sure. I hope so.
It definitely does. It looks like their website is active.
Okay.
We're good. But yeah, okay. So that wraps up sort of all my questions. I'm going to give it a few minutes here and see if anybody has any Q&A for us tonight. They can enter that into the Q&A function on Zoom here. But last, I just want to thank you and Brett and Sarah for joining us. This was really, really, really great. I love sort of stepping away from the presentation PowerPoint sort of thing and just kind of going back and forth over some questions, and you guys gave some great answers. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. This is great.
Cool.
My pleasure.
And we'll definitely give you the contact information, or they'll let us know who to contact to get involved with your, you know, whatever your business purposes might be. But we'll share that out. And if there's any other questions people have, feel free to reach out over email, and we'll get them answered. But right now, I'm just gonna lastly share my screen again and just let people know about our upcoming JUMPinars. So our next event isn't until the 18th of this month. We're having another Jumpstart Think Tank, which is our sort of networking slash open forum for people to kind of problem solve over real estate issues. And a lot of our Jumpstarters are there, as well as some of the mentors from our program. So it's in person at our office on October 18th. It's a Wednesday night from 7 to 9. So be sure to come out to that. And also be sure to RSVP so we know how much pizza to get. But the next JUMPinar is going to be next month in November on the 8th. And it's with a title company that we work with on a lot of Jumpstart projects about understanding HUD-1 and title insurance, which are two documents that obviously we require for any loan application or loan closing. And it's very confusing. So we're going to talk with the title company about the specifics of those documents and how you can navigate them. So any of these you want to register for, go to jumpstartgermantown.com/events, and you'll see all the links there. And lastly, this JUMPinar recording will be available at jumpstartgermantown.com/library, as well as all of our previous JUMPinars. Every one we've done virtual will be up there as a recording. All right, so looks like we've never had no questions. So that must mean people are really excited for the Phillies game, and we did a really good job of covering all the topics. So I appreciate you guys, and I'll be sure to let you know if anybody follows up with any question. All right.
Thanks. Have a good night.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks,
All the
Brett.
best, everyone.
Have a good one.
Go Phils.
See ya.